Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks very much for joining us this afternoon. This is very much an introductory session to the NDIS and what that might mean for staff in early childhood education and care settings and services. So we're thinking of it as a 101, and it may not cover all of the information you require at this point in time, but hopefully we'll get you started and give you some great tips about where to go for more information. I'm ably supported today by Carol Hughes, sitting here beside me.
Good afternoon, everyone.
And Carol will be coming in and out in terms of the session as well and answering some of the questions that might pop up. So I'm going to turn off my video now because it's much easier for you. You'll get a better quality of sound if the video is turned off, and we'll just go straight into the session. All right, so here we go. I've just introduced myself and I've introduced Carol, so we'll keep on moving on. So the session today is structured roughly around in this format, which I'm just going to take you through some very basics around what is the NDIS. I'll talk a little bit about the phasing and when it will be coming to areas around Queensland. Then, more specifically, we'll be talking about what that might mean for you as an early childhood education and care service provider. And then, as I said, we've got some resources which you might find useful. So we're going through that sort of general structure, and as you've already been told, we'll stop at different points and make sure that if there are questions that we've actually answered them. And please just remember to put your questions in the chat so that we can pick them up. Thank you very much. So the NDIS, and I'm assuming many of you will have been following what's been going on at the moment, is a huge reform. And when I'm talking about the NDIS, I'm talking about the National Disability Insurance Scheme, the scheme itself. But you'll also hear me talk about the NDIA, which is actually the National Disability Insurance Agency, which is actually responsible for rolling out the scheme. So sometimes I'll be saying NDIS, sometimes I'll be saying NDIA, and sometimes I just mix them up. So, just bear with me if you think that's happened. And I've been working now in this space for some time, and I have to say, as we've started to commence the transition and we're really going through the change, the sheer complexity of the change that we're going through has suddenly driven home. We knew it was going to happen, but when it was all theoretical, you never quite get a real sense of it. But now that we're actually rolling out. But this is a huge reform, and a really important reform. And it's fundamentally changing the way that supports are provided to people with disability and their families and carers in Australia. It's really changing the focus, and the focus is now around the individual and helping them achieve their particular goals. And the focus is around building greater independence, community improvement, particularly economic participation, and improved overall well-being. So the way that it does that is through a number of particular ways. It looks at the supports that are tailored to the individual. It takes an insurance approach in terms of sustainability of costs, and you'll see there's been a lot around that in the media at the moment around the budget and making sure that the NDIS is fully funded. It has the individual at the centre, so it's about the individual choice and control, or if it's for a young child, it's around parents and their primary carers, about the choices that they need. It's about really focusing on what they need at the time, about their personal goals and what they want in terms of their long-term future, and it's about outcomes. So it is around making sure that those goals are met. So all the fundamentals that are driving the reform are focused on the individual, and that's what you'll be hearing as we go forward. In Queensland, we commenced the rollout of the NDIS in July 2016. We did have a very early launch up in the Townsville area that was a couple of months prior to that, but the actual full rollout for the scheme commenced in July 2016. And as you can see, if you're having a look at our shaded colourings there on the actual map of Queensland, basically the North Queensland area from Townsville across to the Northern Territory border and up to the Gulf country, that area has basically phased in. There's still people going into the scheme there, but the bulk of the potential participants, which were expected, have actually gone into the scheme already. We've also had the Mackay area, which is that beautiful blue down in the Whitsunday area, that's gone in. The area that's currently phasing in at the moment is the Darling Downs southwest area, coming from Toowoomba across to the border as well. So that's happening at the moment and coming to the end. We're expecting transition to commence from July 2017 for Ipswich, Somerset and the Scenic Rim areas. From October, that beautiful purple, we've just got Bundaberg area going in, very discreet, but you know, a very clear group of people area going in. And then the rest of Central Queensland goes in from January 2018. And then we come down to that southeast corner and far north Queensland from July 2018, so the North Burnett area, Fraser Coast, Logan, Redlands, Sherwood, Gold Coast and the hinterland, and then in January 2019 to the end of June 2019, we have the Moreton Bay area, including Strathpine and Caboolture. So that's quite a rapid, it's 3 years, is quite a rapid rate of the rollout of the scheme, given that the numbers that you can see there on the right-hand side, sorry, of your screen, the numbers of participants going in. The most important thing around those general areas is that even though we know roughly geographically when people are going in, they actually go in based on their local government area where they live. So the best way for people to know when they're actually going into the scheme is to go to the website that I've just popped up on your screen there, and that actually allows you to put in a postcode, and then you can see exactly what is the date of the area that you might be living in, or where your service is, the locality of your service, when children and families might be going in the area that you're operating in. Just one little tip for you, just so to be aware of, because we know it's caused some confusion in some of the areas that have rolled out already, is that, of course, depending on the local government area where people are, if they're actually on a border of some of those areas, that's phasing areas, you will have some people going into the scheme who might be in your centres, but others may not be going in for another 18 months or 12 months. It just depends on where that LGA is sitting. So that can cause some confusion, because people are saying, well, how come they're in the scheme and I'm not? Well, it really is based on that LGA of their home address. This next slide is just to give you a very, very broad brush approach to how the scheme is structured and how it's actually working in our communities. So I've mentioned before that the National Disability Insurance Agency, the NDIS, is actually responsible for rolling out the scheme. And of course, the primary relationship is with the participant or the person with disability, the child. For many of us in the work that we do, it'll be around the children that you're working with. Then they have two really important organisations sitting underneath that. You'll see LAC, which is the Local Area Coordination Partner, or the ECI, the Early Childhood Early Intervention Partner. They are working with the NDIA and the local community organisations that will be the face of the NDIA in some of those communities and the place where people can go for information. I'm going to talk about the Local Area Coordination Partner now, and in a little bit of detail, and then I'm going to talk about the Early Childhood Early Intervention Partner in a little while, because they're the one that we're most interested in, because of course it's around early childhood. So the Local Area Coordination has a number of functions. They are a community-based organisation generally, and I'll give you the list of those in just a minute, and their role is to be in the community 6 months before the rollout. So, for example, I think I mentioned Ipswich is going on from 1 July 2017. So in that period before Ipswich going in, the local area coordinator, the community partner, it's not just one person, it's an organisation, of course, will be in the community and able to run information sessions, to have people come through the door and say, I'm hearing about the NDIS, I don't know much about it. I think, I need to know more. They can provide information and advice. The other piece of information that's important for you to know is that in the 6 months before an area rolls out, so for example, I'm using Ipswich through most of the examples here. In the 6 months now, which is now, before 1 July 2017, if you are living in that local government area, you can actually start to make an NDIS access request, which is actually your request to say, I want to become a participant in the scheme. So the local area coordinator can actually provide advice and support for people to make their access request. And then from 1 July 2017, when the area is actually officially opened, if people have been approved for the scheme and have a plan of supports, and they go, okay, now what do I do with it? The local area coordinator will also be able to provide advice about how they actually implement their scheme. So it's got a very important role to play around connecting people and providing information to people about the scheme. And it's, you know, in that, it's sort of the advance guard in terms of getting communities ready. The ETI partner will have a slightly different function, and I'll talk about that in just a little while. So the LAC is also around connecting to the community, knowing what are the community supports, local supports that are available, what the mainstream agencies are in the local community, and just being able to provide general advice if people walk through the door as well. So even if someone was NDIS ineligible, they should still be able to go to the local area coordinator who might be able to provide them with some information and advice about where they can get support. So from there on in, if you are a participant and you've got a plan and the LAC's helped you sort of get started, then the participant would, if they've got a funded plan of supports, they would then be working with some providers to actually implement their plan and get those supports. So that's just a really rough overview of how the scheme itself is operating as it rolls out. You know, there's a lot of more nuances to all of that, but for the moment, that's probably enough just to get us started. I'm popping up a slide which is around the eligibility for the NDIS, and there's two forms of eligibility, and I'm just mentioning them both to you. I mean, obviously the one that you're probably most interested in is for young children, but this is just so you've got the general information, particularly if families come to you and they're wanting some information or support. So the most important thing, of course, is that under 65 years of age, when an access request is made. So you can, if you've made an access request and a participant in the scheme and you turn 65, you can still stay in the scheme, but you have to have made that access request before you turn 65 years of age. The Australian citizen or permanent resident is a really important criteria. So just be aware that you will have children in your centres potentially who are not Australian citizens or permanent residents, and so will not be eligible for the NDIS regardless of whether they have disability or not. So that actually impacts on New Zealand citizens. They are not eligible for the scheme. So it's worth noting that. And then there is that third criteria around they must have a disability or condition that's likely to be permanent and substantially reduce the ability to participate in everyday activities. So the NDIA, the agency itself, is the only organisation that will make the determination about whether someone is eligible for the scheme or not. So if someone comes to you and asks for advice, what we are saying, and I've been saying it to school systems and I'm saying it to yourself, is send people to the NDIS and the access checker, because we cannot make an assumption that even if someone has a disability that they will be eligible for the scheme. So that's my advice to everyone, and it would hold true for your early childhood settings as well. But the area of access that you're probably most interested in, because you are working with young children, is around the NDIS early intervention rules. And of course, this is very different. So quite a separate way of young children coming into the scheme from what I've just described to you. And the early childhood early intervention partner that I talked about, and I will talk about more, is really important in the role that they will play. But to be eligible for the NDIS, you have an impairment or condition that is likely to be permanent, lifelong, or, and this is the one we're most interested in, is a child under age 6 with either a developmental delay or disability. So you can come in on either ways, in those ways, and the developmental delay is really around the child taking longer to reach age-appropriate developmental milestones. For some children, this may just be temporary. For others, it might be a sign that they have another condition, and so you know, it'll just depend. But what they're saying for them at the moment is that anyone can walk through the door and get support in those 0 to 6 years if they have any concerns about their child. So the early childhood, early intervention approach that the NDIS has developed was put together for a very specific reason. The NDIS came to the conclusion that there was such variation in the way that each state and territory supported young children that it needed to develop a national approach, and that's what it's done. So if you are interested in knowing more about its approach, we've just dropped up the website address for that. And the approach was developed based on research which shows that inclusion and participation in everyday environments and activities provide children with opportunities for developmental growth and social participation. So the notion of inclusion in mainstream settings is really fundamental to the way that they are talking about their early intervention approach. And to put the approach in place, they are working with their early childhood, early intervention partners. And so these community partners, the ECI partner, will work, will be the ones that families will be able to go to. So they will be a one-stop shop, basically, for families who have children with disability or who are concerned about the development of their child. So there will be an open door approach. People can walk through the door and just say, I'm not sure. They don't have to have a diagnosis of disability to come in and get support. The early intervention partners will be organisations that have an array of specialists in early childhood, early intervention, and they will have a number of, they might have OT, they might have early childhood educators, physiotherapists, psychologists, anybody working together so that anyone can come through the door and they'll be able to provide that support for the family. So the way that it's been envisaged, and this is the way that we know that it's been working up in the Townsville area and also in the Toowoomba area where they're just getting started though, so it's still being, the way that they are working with communities is still consolidating, okay, so, but this is the general approach that we're expecting to happen is that anyone can come through the door if they have a young child and say, look, I'm concerned. Initially, it might just be around getting some advice and information, or it might, you know, or the early childhood, early intervention partner might say, actually, I think you need to go and get some support through Queensland Health, for example, that, you know, there's something really significant that we need to explore further. They might say, actually, I think it is you know, it looks like there is some developmental delay. We can give you some strategies and advice about what you can try and do with your child, and we'll touch base with you and see how that's going. They'll also say, actually, you know, there's some mainstream services such as play groups or other early childhood settings that might be really beneficial and connect them through to. But they will work on this notion of a transdisciplinary approach. So if they go through the partner and they're actually working, the partner is working with them, they'll basically deal with just one worker who will work with the others behind the scenes to make sure that the right information and advice is being given to the parent. You know, as you'd be aware, and when the family are coming to realisation that their child may have a disability or there is something that's concerning to them in terms of their child's development, this is a really difficult stage, and so this is around giving them support in a way that we've never had before. It's been quite fragmented about how information and support will be given, so it's really bringing it all together in one place. So it's quite a significant change. Then, if they've gone through all of that and they think, all right, no, this child actually will need funded support through the scheme, the ECI partner, and only the ECI partner is the only ones that can do this, the LAC can't do it, can actually put together a plan of funded supports for the child. They can't approve it, they have to go through to the NDIA to actually approve, but the actual plan of supports can be put in place, and then it goes forward to the NDIS. So that's basically how that will work. And for some children, they might not need much more than the light touch approach that I just talked about, and for other children, they will go in and get funded support. So these are the list of community providers that we have now, sorry, community partners that the NDIS has now operating in our communities. So the LAC partner is in place generally 6 months before the rollout date. The early childhood early intervention partner will commence from the rollout date. So you can see the ETI partner, EACH, each, for the Ipswich area is only going to be on board from 1 July 2017, but Carers Queensland, the LAC, is already in place from 1 February 2017. So the NDIA will continue to put out tenders for all of the other areas that are rolling out across Queensland. I know that they've actually just finished the tender for the Rockhampton area, but we haven't seen the announcements yet. So as that information becomes available, that'll be shared. So they're who the partners are now. So if you're in any of those areas and you think, for example, my families might need some information, you can contact any of the partners that are operating from now, particularly if you're in the Bundaberg area, and say, look, I know it's only the LAC, but they will still be able to provide advice and information about the scheme if you think families in your area need it. So information is that's what everybody needs at the moment. And so when we've been saying to most people, and I'll say it to yourselves again, is that the scheme has changed considerably from when it was in trial to how it's actually being rolled out now. So one of the things we're suggesting to people is that you don't hold information personally about the scheme. You don't try and tell people how it will work. If they need information, either send them to the NDIS itself through the, some people are good at navigating websites and they'll be quite comfortable with it, or they can call the NDIS hotline for information. I've popped up on that screen an NDIS Ready page, which has resources to help people just think about what they need to do to get ready. Or if you're in the rollout areas, the local area coordinator or the early childhood early intervention partner. If you're in an area that is not due to roll out for another 6 months, 12 months, then the Queensland Government have been funding 11 community organisations to help communities prepare for the NDIS. And there is a calendar of events for Queensland at the website that you can see there. Those organisations will also have some flexibility and could conceivably come and run an information session in your local community if you think there's a written need. So if you're in an area, you're 12 months away and you go, actually nobody knows much about anything, but we think there's a real need in our community, you can actually go onto that site and get the contact details and be able to contact them. You might want to run it as a cluster event, across a whole range of services targeting families in your area. So they won't be operating in the rollout areas, but they are still available for those areas that are due to roll out. So I'm going to have a little pause there. I'm going to have a glass of water, and this is an opportunity for us to check if there are any questions and answer any questions that may have popped up during that time.
Okay, everyone. So thank you, Kathy, for your question in relation to a list of partnership places that you can access and where you can go to connect them. So with Ipswich coming online, the service is already there. What may be available in the Logan City area, we're not sure at this stage, but the partners we do know, we did pop up there on the screen for you. Now, the other thing I just wanted to mention now that Meg's gone through some of that information about the role of the NDIS, you may be wondering in terms of NDIS eligibility, whether you can still access funding from both the state government and the Commonwealth government. And the answer to that is yes. As Meg indicated, the NDIS will provide for the personal and wellbeing needs of the child. And it's up to our services through support, through things like the State Government Disability Inclusion Support for Queensland Kindergarten Program, better known as DISC, and through the Commonwealth Government Inclusion Support Program, better known as the ISP program, those services will still be available to ECEC services regardless of whether a child is on an NDIS plan or not, because these programs provide for educational support, whereas the NDIS provides for that personal and wellbeing needs of the child. So through both DISC and ISB, you can apply for support, which helps the access to a service, the educational adjustments for the child to participate fully in the program, and of course that development of an inclusive environment in the service. So in relation to Katrina's question about HAQA funding, helping children with autism funding, that funding will be phased out as the NDIS is phased in.
So just in relation to that, if a child is in receipt of HAQA funding, they will continue up until the point that they get an NDIS plan and that plan is activated. And then their HAQA funding will cease because they will then be getting funding through the NDIS. But after, so if children can still make applications to HAQA at the moment, and it's only in the areas where the NDIS has rolled out where that is not available.
So I just encourage you to keep putting your questions through to the chat panel while Meg is speaking, and we'll move into the next session. Thanks, Meg.
All right, thank you, Carol. So we've talked about, basically what the NDIS is, when it's coming to an area near you, so to speak. And now we're going to talk a little bit about what you can expect as an ECEC service. And I'm saying that this is not definitive. This is just some general information for you. I'm not saying this is exactly how it will be. You might find that things are slightly different, but this is more generally how we think it will go. So the slide up there at the moment actually reflects what Carol just told you, in the sense that ECEC services will continue to make reasonable adjustments and work to include children in your services. That's your responsibility as a mainstream agency, in the same way that it's the responsibility of schools and the education system in that going forward. So the NDIS is not intended to replace the supports that mainstream services and universal services take. If it did, it would definitely go broke. The system would be completely unsustainable. So the NDIS will be responsible for the early interventions that enhance a child's functioning to undertake the activities of daily living. And that's what you go, well, what the hell does that mean, really? It doesn't sort of sound a bit like gobbledygook. But basically it means it talks about their individualised supports that they might need. The parents will have goals for their child, and they might be things around their speech language. It might be building their core strength so they can sit up, in a chair. It could be a range of things, or the child might actually need a wheelchair and need some support. So they will look at what that child needs in those settings. Sometimes it might mean then that the child will actually get therapy supports so that they can work on their speech, physio in terms of their core strengths, whatever it might be. The OTs will work with them in terms of if they need wheelchairs or other forms of functional support in that space. They'll also have a look at what supports the family might need, because really in the early childhood space, it will look at how the family is supported and build capability of the family to support their child. That's as critical a part in the early intervention space as it is around just focusing on what the child needs as an individual. So there's a whole range of things that might take place, but the whole intent of the early intervention approach is to reduce the future support needs. The NDIS was put together from the concept of the Productivity Commission. So the Productivity Commission was all around going, if we intervene early and with the right supports, then over time the total cost diminishes, because it's not needed all the way through a child's developmental stages. So early intervention is a really critical part of how the scheme operates. So if you're really interested in what the NDIS will fund, you can actually go in and have a look at some of the fact sheets. But it's you know, a lot of it is around at the moment is around therapy supports. That's what we're really seeing. But in terms of what that might mean for you as an early childhood, early intervention partner, early childhood, sorry, now I'm getting my language completely mixed up. So early childhood education and care provider. Too many early childhoods in this space, so it's causing me some confusion. I mean, really it's around collaborative work that we already do to support children. So that's the space that I think we all work in, and this is where you might see an increase in the number of supports that children and families are receiving. I mean, we already have HACWA, as you know, so you've probably already had quite a bit of contact with other supports that the family might be receiving, but this might see a bit of an increase in the numbers going through, and it's really around, well, what do you need to do to support the family and the child? So the one thing that you can ask, but families aren't obliged to tell you, but hopefully they will share with you, is whether their child is actually on an NDIS plan. Because if they are happy to share the plan with you, then you will know what the goals are that the family has for the child, and they can be integrated into how you're also working with the child. The other thing we're seeing, and we definitely know this has been happening quite a bit, is that parents will be requesting that there could be meetings between their NDIS-funded service providers and where the child is attending to make sure that there's some continuity of support from one of the child's natural settings to the other. So if there is a particular behaviour support that's being put in place, then we'll say, well, you know, is that something that you can also use that same strategy in your centre so that there is, you know, continuity for the child, and the child can really be worked on and developed up that skill set that they're identifying. So those conversations are probably the most critical things that will happen at this point in time in terms of what you might be asked to do. But the other thing that has happened, and we know this has been happening, is that they might actually come and say, can my therapist work with my child during the time that they're in your centre? And that's something that might take a little bit of thinking through. I mean, you may not say yes and you may not say no. I mean, obviously, you are responsible for how the day-to-day management of your centre. And I understand from Carol that the division is developing up a resource sheet that are around attendance by external support professionals at ECEC services. It's just going through its approval to publish process, so that'll be up on some stage going into the future, and that'll just give you some things to consider. But the things that we do know that have come up are things like that you might want to think through as how often are they asking this to do? Is this just going to be a one-off so that they can observe the child in their natural environment so that they can build a plan around the supports to work with the family? The NDIA itself is saying, you know, what we want in terms of support is to actually really build family capabilities. The family is the one are with the child for the most of their, you know, early days. So if we work with the family and build their capability, then we're going to see better improvements for the child. So they might say, well, you know, I just want to come in and have a look because I want to talk about, you know, what we could put in place in that space. Or they might say, oh, I want to come in 3 days a week and deliver speech-language sessions to the child in a space, either in the room or outside of the room. You know, do you have somewhere where I can do that? Now, that will have significant implications for you because that might mean that it will be impacting not only on the child whom the support is being provided to, but every other child in that room. It will also be impacting on the way that your educators and care workers are working with the children, so that might not be a great idea. You might also not have space available, or you might be concerned about your duty of care in terms of will you be able to adequately monitor the well-being of that child if they're sitting in a room where you're not able to see them. And if, you know, the other part of this, if you do have care work therapists coming in, what will be the impact on other children? And, you know, do you need other parents to consent to have that person in the room. So there's some significant considerations that you'll need to work through. What we've found in this, when the rollout areas where these questions have popped up, is that it really needs to be a discussion. You know, blanket yes or blanket no's don't appear to work well. What you need to do is work through what the requirement is and why it's being asked, and then go, well, these are the considerations I have to go through. If you have those discussions with the parent and with their provider, if that's the three-way discussion, sometimes you can come to a conclusion that no, maybe one-off is okay, but you don't want it to see regular, because it's actually it doesn't work for the child. It's very impactful. It really impacts on their inclusion into in the room. So, you know, you might come to some different decisions. So what is seen as a good idea when you first get your package and you go, oh my goodness, I've got therapy. Parents are really excited. They're getting supports that they haven't had before and to some extent. Once you've had those conversations, we're hearing that people are actually changing their minds and thinking a little bit more around, well, how would this best be delivered? And so the one thing that we do know is that where there are providers providing support to the family, particularly around behaviour supports, for example, where those strategies are shared with service providers and they are being able to then be integrated into the way that your educators and care workers are working with the children, that can be really beneficial. So I'm saying if there was any advice in this space, it's around, you know, have the conversation and be open to the requests, but really work through what that might mean for you and for everyone else that's in your centre. Now, I'm just dropping up this slide just to be really clear about what's happening with early childhood development programs, because some of you might actually already have some contact with them. So the early childhood development programs are services run by the Department of Education and Training, and they are continuing. So they will continue to run as they do now until 2020, and they will continue to accept new enrolments. And then in 2020, there'll be a review to determine whether they're going to be continued after the NDIS rollout is completed. So it's a genuine open question. We haven't made any determinations about what's happening to ECDPs. They're staying open so that families have some assurity and continuity of support as the NDIS is rolled out. And because the early intervention approach is so new, it was seen by the Minister to be really important that we gave that continuity of support to families. So at the moment, a child can be in an ECDP and also receiving NDIS funded support. There is no change to what's happening, and so if their ECDPs are supporting you and to support a child in your centre, that will also continue. So, you know, that's going to take a little bit of time to shake down as we see how the early childhood, early intervention supports roll out.
Okay, and now we'll flip over to question time again. So get any questions you may have into the chat panel. And we have one that was put up during the time from Katrina. And so there's a further question to what we talked about in relation to HACWA funding. Who can I contact to clarify this, as we've been informed we cannot enrol children 6 weeks prior to the rollout? Is there a contact for us to speak with?
So the 6 weeks prior is probably about right, because if it's prior to rollout, they'll be saying, well, the child should actually be able to make an NDIS access request, and so the anticipation would be that. But HACWA is a Commonwealth program, so you actually need to get your information from the Commonwealth in regard to that. But Carol, what we'll be able to do is actually get a contact. I think it will only be an email address, to be honest, but we can actually get that out to you.
Yes. Thanks, Meg. And we have a second question from Tracy, suggesting that she add the following question to her enrolment form. Tracy, does your child have an NDIS plan? That's totally up to the parent to disclose that information to the service if they want to. So whether or not you may like to add it to your enrolment form or not, I think would be an individual decision for your service.
That's right. Yeah, there's no obligation for a family to share that information, and there's certainly no mechanism for the NDIA to share information with anyone. They're just not allowed under their legislation. So they will not be sharing information with you. It will only have to come through the family.
So thanks very much for your questions. We're about to ask Meg to go on to the next section. So just remember, if you have any further questions, pop them in the chat as Meg's speaking, and we can address them at the next question slide. Thank you.
All right. So we're really coming to the end of the session, and you know, as I said, this is really just a 101. There might be a whole range of questions that are going to pop up into your head after this. But one of the things I wanted to share with you, and actually I have to say Carol really was the one who garnered all of these resources and put them together, is the range of resources that are currently sitting out in the system, and they are building around early childhood, early intervention and what it looks like in the NDIS space. So the first one is the Early Childhood, Early Intervention Australia's guidelines, the Best Practice in Early Childhood Intervention guidelines. So these were developed based on the ETI approach, but they really start to unpack what should be happening in this space. And I think I talked before around the transdisciplinary approach. So it really talks about what does quality early childhood, early intervention look like, and it does talk about transdisciplinary approaches. It talks about being family-centred and what that might mean, and then how you work with a child in this space. And it really talks about the development of a child's functional skills and how that enables them to participate meaningfully in everyday activities alongside their typically developing peers. So that's its focus, and it starts to unpack that through the 7 key principles and the 4 quality areas that are tucked in under that document. So if you're really interested, that's a good document to go and look at. But if you have families that are going, well, I don't know anything much about this, how do I as a family, if I've got choice and control, which I haven't really had much before, I mean, if families have had HAC where they've had some experiences of managing, you know, how they spend their money and getting access to service providers, but not everyone's had HAC or Better Start funding. And for many families, this notion of having choice and control and being able to determine how to spend their money and take advice and work out what they want for their child and who would be the best provider, that's quite daunting. And we are hearing that it is daunting for many people. And from the early the trial sites, we heard that it took up to 3 years for some people to get really comfortable in this space around making decisions and being able to make a determination about what does good quality practice look like. So this booklet is actually a really good one because it's fairly simple to read, and the one thing it does do is explore what high-quality evidence-based supports look like. And that notion of evidence-based is really important because there are a lot of providers out there and families will be making choices. Some of them will be suggesting practices that may not have a very strong evidence base. So if families can build their capability and their understanding, they will be able to make better decisions about what is the best for their child. And it is that flip to go, well, they are the decision makers and they will be making these decisions, but in some instances they will need support. So the one thing that I haven't said is that families are likely to be managing their child's package, but they don't have to be. So they can be self-managing and managing the child's package for themselves, but if they feel like they need support, and a lot of people do, particularly in the early stages, someone can actually help them manage their package for them. And that is usually done in collaboration, but there will be a provider funded through their package who will work with them to manage the package. And in other instances, it might be the NDIA itself who's managing the package. So there are a range of ways that packages are managed. But still, this notion of building capability and understanding for everyone, not just families, but anyone who is a participant in the scheme around their own ability to manage for themselves, that's really fundamentally built in. So that ECI family booklet is a really easy read. I'd highly recommend it even for yourselves, but certainly if you have families that are interested. the website that I'm just throwing up on the screen at the moment, the Inclusion Hub, was also put together as a collaboration between the National Disability Insurance Scheme and the ECIA, and it is to help ECEC services, families and communities understand and navigate the NDIS. So the point of this is, is that it's actually probably easier than the NDIS main website, because this is just early childhood oriented. So most of the information services are there, and you don't have to sort of go further afield. So again, a really good site if you just want to focus on early childhood. This site is one that I think is really valuable for everyone. It just gives you a quick overview of a whole range of disability and what are the main factors in terms of that disability type, you know, what the conditions are and what the presenting condition might be. So if a family comes and they said, well, my child has, I'm not even going to try anything, an acquired brain injury, that'll work for me. I'm not going to try anything that I can't pronounce easily. And you go, well, what does that really mean? You can pop in and have a look and see. None of us are experts in disability, and we're not expected to be. But it just gives you some information that will just guide you around what could be expected if a child is wanting to register in your centre. We haven't got time to do it now, but if you have got any time and you're interested, this is a lovely little video of a young boy up in the Townsville area who is actually an NDIS participant, and it's just talking just generally about what that means for him and how it's the package is being put together. So it just gives you a bit more context around a real child and what it's meaning for them. So if you have time and you're interested, just recommend having a little look at that. And I am aware we're really close to time, and I wanted to you to have an opportunity to ask a couple more questions. But this ECEC website is quite new, went up on the 9th of May, and it's really pulling everything together that we've sort of talked about. It has your legislative obligations, the funding and support programs that are available, the NDIS, including early intervention, so links to all of that, the inclusion resources and professional development that are available. Early Years Connect resources are moving here from 1 July 2017, and webmail recordings are also about, sorry Carol, you may want to explain that one.
This webinar recording will also go up on this site, a link to it, and it should be available about the second week in June. However, you will be emailed a link to the webinar recording as soon as it's available.
Thanks, Carol. So again, everything's sort of tucked together in an easy space for you as ECEC service providers. So highly recommend that one. You may have already been on and seen it if you've got an alert up on your system about when things change on the website. So that's basically taking us through where the general information we wanted you to know. And again, I'm just reminding you where the main information sits, and that is with the NDIS. So the last warning, and I keep saying it because information is changing. The NDIS does change the way that it's operating if it sees a need to do so. So the one point of truth at all times remains the NDIS. So if families are really wanting information, I'd still highly recommend popping them in through to there. So we've been through pretty much, we've covered off pretty much everything that we wanted to today. If you've still got some questions, now's the time to ask them, and we'll see if we can answer them in our last few minutes.
Thanks, Meg. We have a question from Letitia about, do schools need to provide IEP or support plans to the NDIS?
Okay. So, Letitia, this is very specific for the school sector, and I'm happy to answer it, but I just don't want to confuse everyone who's sitting in the early childhood education and care sector around this. So for schools, if they have, for example, if a child has been through a verification process or has an individual curriculum plan or a health management plan sitting in the school system, and the family are going to make an NDIS access request, the family can ask for that information, a report, an EAP report, a verification report to be run off, so that will be tended to the NDIS as proof of the child's functional impact of their disability. It is not a diagnosis. It is not evidence. It is not a diagnosis. It is just providing supporting documentation around the functional impact of the child's disability. So schools are encouraged to provide that information to families. Families can request it at any time. It is actually, it's not something that schools hold and say you can't have. They can request it at any time. But it can be useful if they provide it to the NDIA, if they're making a access request for their child. Remembering that 0 to 6, children go into the scheme through the Early Childhood Early Intervention Gateway and they don't need to have diagnosis. But from 7 onwards, if they are older, they then will need to make an NDIS access request and they will need to have evidence. So that's the difference.
Thanks very much, Meg. We've had a request about sending through the webinar for reference for other staff, and yes, anyone who is registered for the webinar will receive an email with the webinar links. And the last question I have is, if the child has NDIS with the school, can they use the funding off the childcare fees during after-school care at a long daycare setting?
I think, Carol, we might if we know who that person is, we might have that answer that question separately, because I need to unpack that a little bit and make sure. I don't want to give wrong advice on that question, so we might follow that up separately if that's okay.
Yes, and I think the thing to remember is that choice and control, Meg, it's up to the parent to decide how any NDIS funding they get as a family is utilised. Mm. So whether it's something to do with school, something to do with outside school hours care, that choice and control indicate that that's the family's decision as to how that's used.
Oh, and there is a caveat that on though. Mainstream services, the NDIS will not fund what is the responsibility of a mainstream service. So there is that caveat that sits over that. So that's why I want to unpack a little bit more of that question, Carol.
So thank you very much. I just want to raise the fact that you may like to reflect on the webinar today, and if you have any further questions or queries about it, this is my email address, and you're very welcome to email me through any of those queries, and we'll do our best to get an answer for you. So thanks very much for your participation today.